brand episode of the Code Drop. Today we're going to continue with the basics of HTML, and today we're going to learn how to make HTML forms. So what forms are? Forms are basically a section of HTML page where users have lots of varieties of input fields and controls where they can alter the values or they can enter new values from scratch and they can fill out the form. So what happens when you fill the form? Basically, form is used for conducting any kind of survey or making an account in the website you're using, and there are many other reasons for using a form. So we need to learn how to make HTML forms. So let's start by adding a form tag first. So let's open our folder and let's open in the Visual Studio Code. So basically a form starts with the form tag because form is the main container of an HTML form. Form tag is the container of any HTML form. So let's add our form tag, and then the main element in the form is an input tag. So input tag is basically what defines what type of input a user is going to give. So we have this attribute called type, and in the type you can see that there are many attributes which you can use. We'll start with the text one. So let's add text attribute and let's add an input button of type submit, so we can know if the form is working or not. Okay, let's go live now and see this in action. So you can see that we have our input field here and we have our submit query button. Okay, now we'll edit this form, we'll add some text in here, and then if we click on submit, you can see that something happened, but we haven't decided what should happen when a user clicks on submit button, so there won't be anything happening necessarily actually. Okay, so this is how you add an input field to the form. Now we will add a BR here to give a break, and let's give one BR here also. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to basically learn more about these attributes like the type attribute. So we'll add more attributes like this and learn how these attributes affect the input field actually. So let's start by adding a min length attribute. So what min length attribute does is it restricts that a user should input at least these number of characters in the input field. So if we specify 8 here, so a user needs to input at least 8 characters in the input field. So let's add QWERTY. These are 6 characters, and let's add Y. So these are 7 characters. When we click on submit, you'll see this message saying that we need to add 8 or more characters. So let's add one more character. We'll make it 8. And when you click on submit, you can see that the form has submitted. Now this is the min length attribute. We also have a max length attribute. Just like the min length, it does the opposite. It restricts how many number of characters a user can input. So let's say a user can input at max of 9 characters. We'll change this to 6. The min length attribute will change it to 6. Now a user can actually enter a maximum of 9 characters, and he should enter a minimum of 6 characters. So we'll add numbers this time. Let's add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we have this minimum length. We have passed the minimum length barrier, and now you want to check if we can enter more than 9 characters. So let's add 7, 8, 9. We have 9 characters now, and then we add one more character. It doesn't happen because we have to specify that the maximum length a user input field should be is 9. So these are the two attributes, min length and max length. And there's one more attribute called required. So using required, we can actually mention that we have to enter some value in it for the form to be submitted. So if you don't enter any value here, you'll see that this is the required field. This error comes up because we have set it as required. So if we don't enter a value, the form won't be submitted. So let's again add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We are on our barrier. We have passed our maximum length barrier and minimum length barrier, and when we click on submit, it will submit. Now there's also one more attribute called placeholder which we can use, and placeholder basically gives info on what a user has to input. So let's say that it is a text type input, so we'll say text type input, and when we click on save, you can see that a text type input has appeared inside of the input field, and it's somewhat grayed out because it's not some actual text. When we click on the input field and start entering something, that text will disappear and our value will come over there. So this is placeholder. Now we have one more attribute called value. So using value, we can actually give a predefined value for our input field. Let's add name here. So when we save, you can see that they have a name here. So it means that name will be a predefined thing which will be there in this input tab. We can change this or we can remove this altogether, but when we reload the form, that name thing will always be there because it's a predefined value we are giving. So let's add names and enr so that we can get it inside of an input barrier, and when we click on submit, it submits, and when it reloads, you can see that the name is always there because it's a predefined input. So let's remove this one, and we're going to add a few more input types and see how they work. So let's add input type of number. Okay, so when we click on save, you can see that there's one more input field here and it accepts numbers. So we can define a number and we can submit. Let's add it here and we can click on submit and the form gets submitted just like that. Now we also have an input type of email. So suppose that you want a user to give an email address, so you can use a string, but you'll have to write that validation thing. But if you use the type of email, you don't need to write any validation because HTML itself will take care that if that input type is mail or not. Let's add some texture, let's add some number here, and now we want to check if its email is validating or not. So let's add some text, and when you click on submit, okay, it's not 6 characters, let's add 6 characters, and when you click on submit, you can see that it's saying that it should be a valid email address, and you know that QWERTY is not an valid email address. A valid email address is username followed by @ followed by domain name. So it's not a valid email address. So let's add @ and let's add some domain name. So they'll say try.com. Now when you hit on submit, the form submits itself because there are no validation checks required. All the checks are ticked. Now when we see our form, it's actually quite confusing what we have to input in what field. So we can use an tag called label to define what we have to enter in the specific input field. So there's a text field, we'll just add a label of, let's say, name. So we'll add a label of name, and you can see that name has appeared before the input field. We'll add a BR here to give it a break, and let's add a label before this, and that label should say contact, and we'll give a BR here. Now you can see that the contact has appeared. So basically we are getting this right. We are using label tag to instruct the users what they have to input in the specific input field. Let's add email address here, and we'll add a BR. So you can see that we have our labels here, we have our input fields here, and we have our submit button here. So this is how you make a basic HTML form. Now these are the basic inputs, and we can actually add a few more types of inputs also, like radio buttons and the checkboxes and ranges. So let's start doing that. So first we'll input a radio button. So you want a radio button, so its input type is radio, and we'll add a value here. We'll say that it's radio 1. Also you want a label, so we'll give a label and we'll say radio button, and we'll save it. We'll give a BR here, we'll give a break. Now you can see that we have a radio button here. You can click on this to select it, and we can actually add one more radio button. So what radio button basically does is it actually is helpful in selecting one of the choices. So it's basically like a multiple choice question, and you can make these choices. So we'll add one more radio button and hit save. So you can see that we have two choices, but in the multiple choice option we should not allow users to click on both of them. So you can see that a user can click on both of them. We want only one to be clicked. That should be unchecked automatically. So to do that, we'll add an attribute called name, and name of the radio button should be same in both of the inputs. So if we are saying radio in this, so we'll have to give the same name to the other input also, radio. And when we do that, now we can select only one of these radio buttons. So it can be either one or it can be either two, not both of them. So this is how you make a radio button. Now let's give a break, and now let's add a checkbox. So to add a checkbox, proceed as giving input and type checkbox, and there's no necessity of giving a name, but we can give a name, and let's say check, let's say save, and let's say check, click to check. So we can use checkboxes to indicate that if a user is agreeing to something, if a user wants to turn on a thing or not. So if it clicks on the check, then he wants that function to be turned on. If it does not, then it does not want to be turned on, like that. So you can actually use it for a yes or no question. So let's actually say yes or no here. Instead of click to check, we'll say yes or no. So if a user clicks on it, then he agrees. If it doesn't, then he does not agrees. So you can actually click on it to see that if we click on it, it's checked, we have a tick mark, and if we click it again, that tick mark goes away. So this is how you make a checkbox. And also we can make ranges. So ranges are basically used for selecting a range of between like given values like 1 and 10, or maybe 1 and 100. So let's add an input type of range, and we'll add a label calling range. Select a number in between, and to make a range we need to specify the maximum minimum value. So maximum value is defined by using the max attribute, and we can say that 10 will be the max value which a user can input, and minimum value will be 1. So a user can input at least 1 and at max 10. So when you click on save, that you can see there, now we can slide the bar and decide what value you want to give. So if the bar is at maximum, then it's 10, and if the bar is at minimum, it's at 1. So that's how it works. Now these are the input types you can actually include in form. This is how you make an HTML form basically. So this is it for today, guys. If you have any doubts regarding to the input types you use today, you can put them up in the comment section. I'll also link this code in the description, and you can see to understand it better. Thumbs up if you liked it, subs if you loved it. I'll see you on the next episode of the Code Drop. Bye for now.